April 1943. 27,000 feet. An otherworldly silence. Only the wind, the engine, and death waiting somewhere among the clouds. Ralph Hermischen, a veteran of the Luftwaffe, an elite pilot with 4 years of war under his belt, tilted his head to the side and did something no soldier should ever do in the presence of the enemy. He laughed. Climbing toward his formation, slowly, almost looking ashamed to exist, was the new hope of American aviation. A plump, bulky machine that looked like it had come out of a drunken engineer's nightmare. Hermischen opened his radio. His voice came through clear, mocking. The Americans have sent us flying milk bottles. The German formation exploded in laughter up there, at 27,000 feet, over the France they ruled. They called that creature Indiana Fat, a flying pig. The Germans had 4 years of relentless war. The Americans had exactly 0 days of combat.
They laughed with the absolute pride of those who rule the skies. And it was the biggest mistake of their lives. Because by May 1945, there was not a single pilot from that formation left alive to tell the story. This is not just the story of a metal plane. This is the chronicle of a profound cultural and philosophical clash. It is the story of how the industrial logic of an emerging superpower crushed piece by piece the tactical brilliance and the arrogance of an empire. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was not born to be pretty. It was born out of absolute panic in June 1940, when Hitler's fighters were swallowing Western Europe. The chief engineer of Republic Aviation, Alexander Kartveli, received a direct and desperate order from the American military. Build a high-altitude interceptor capable of outperforming the best that Germany has. What he designed on the drawing board shocked the authorities.
It will be a dinosaur, Kartveli himself admitted to his design team. But it will be a dinosaur with great proportions. When the first prototype touched the runway, the test pilots approached that mountain of aluminum and asked the exact same question. Does this thing actually fly? Empty, it weighed nearly 5 tons. Fully loaded, it exceeded 7. It was 65% heavier than any other single-engine fighter on the planet. The exotic barrel shape was not a whim. It was the only geometric form capable of housing the largest mechanical heart ever put into a fighter. The Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp 18-cylinder radial engine, producing 2,000 horsepower, coupled with a colossal turbo supercharger system running all the way through the inside of the tail. In the factories of Long Island and Indiana, thousands of workers, many of them women, assembled these machines around the clock.
If you want to discover more truths about military history, subscribe to our channel right now. Don't forget to like this video. It helps us a lot to produce more high-quality documentaries. And please, leave a comment below sharing your opinions or a story about veterans in your family. Thanks for watching. The P-47 was a locomotive with wings, but taming this titan came at high cost. In the first months of training on American soil, the P-47 killed more young pilots in landing and takeoff accidents than the Germans would shoot down in the early stages of the war. It demanded that the pilot forget everything he knew about aviation. As the legendary pilot Robert Johnson described it, the power was unbelievable. You did not fly the P-47.
You strapped yourself to it and pointed it at the enemy. When the first units of the P-47 arrived in England in 1943, the British pilots of the Royal Air Force looked at the spacious cockpit of the American plane and joked, "If you are attacked, the best evasive maneuver is to unstrap your seatbelt and run around to hide in the corners of the cockpit." And the first combat reports seemed to prove the jokes right.
The P-47 flew like a heavy truck at medium altitudes. It could not make tight turns like the enemy fighters, and its climb rate was anemic. In the first month, 14 Thunderbolts were shot down for only 3 confirmed victories. German intelligence analysts archived the P-47 under the label of minimal threat, but German arrogance prevented them from seeing a terrifying statistical anomaly. The rare P-47 fighters that were shot down had to absorb an amount of damage that would have disintegrated 3 European fighters. The radial engine, unlike the liquid-cooled engines of the German fighters, had no vulnerable radiators. It kept running, even with entire cylinders blown apart by 20mm cannons. The day the myth of the Thunderbolt's indestructibility was written in blood was June 26, 1943.
Second Lieutenant Robert Johnson was returning from a mission when his group was brutally ambushed by 16 German Focke-Wulf fighters. Johnson's plane was the first to be hit. In less than 5 seconds, 21 20mm cannon shells exploded against the fuselage of his P-47. The windscreen was completely blinded by boiling oil and hydraulic fluid. Fire began to lick the instrument panel inside the cockpit. Wounded by shrapnel in his leg and nose, Johnson made the decision to bail out. He released his harness, stood up, and tried to slide the canopy back. But a cannon shell had detonated directly in the canopy tracks, welding the metal shut and trapping him inside a burning tomb at 27,000 feet. Trapped, suffocating from the smoke, and with zero visibility, Johnson managed, by some miracle, to stabilize the aircraft using only the remaining instruments.
He pointed the nose of what was left of the plane toward the English Channel. He was alone, helpless, flying at less than 170 miles per hour. That was when a lone German fighter spotted the smoking wreckage of the P-47. Seeing the chance for an easy kill, the German pilot positioned himself right on Johnson's tail and opened fire. Johnson had no way to maneuver. He just huddled behind the 3/8 of an inch steel armor plate behind his seat, closed his eyes, and waited for death as hundreds of bullets shredded the aluminum around him. The German pilot emptied all of his cannons. Infuriated to see the American plane still flying, he pulled his fighter alongside, just a couple of meters away from Johnson's cockpit. Through the shattered glass, the 2 adversaries looked into each other's eyes. Johnson reports seeing the young German pilot's face change from a look of triumph to absolute confusion.
And finally, to something very close to fear. The German pulled back, repositioned himself, and emptied his remaining machine guns into the tail of the Thunderbolt. Nothing happened. The 7-ton monster refused to fall. The German pilot pulled alongside one last time, stared at that impossible flying wreck, shook his head in pure disbelief, gave a solemn military salute to the American, and banked away. He was completely out of ammunition. Johnson landed at Manston Air Base. The crew chief stopped counting the holes in the fuselage after reaching number 200. 3 of the 4 main structural longerons holding the plane together were snapped completely in half. But the P-47 kept its most sacred promise. It brought its pilot home alive. Starting that summer, American pilots learned how to play the P-47's game.
The command order was clear. Do not turn with them. Do not climb with them at low altitude. Use your weight. Use your dive speed. Use your guns. The weight, which once seemed like a flaw, turned into a devastating physical weapon. In a vertical dive from 30,000 feet, the P-47 broke the laws of aerodynamics and reached an incredible 550 miles per hour. Speeds where the wings of German fighters would start to rip off due to extreme air pressure. The Thunderbolt came down like a hammer from heaven. And when it reached the correct distance, American engineering showed its teeth. Unlike European fighters that relied on cannons with limited ammunition, the P-47 carried 8.50 caliber Browning M2 machine guns installed in the wings. The mechanics adjusted the convergence of these weapons so that their trajectories crossed.
We are just scratching the surface of this incredible history. If you are enjoying this documentary, take a brief moment right now to subscribe to the channel and hit the like button. Your support is what allows us to keep digging into these forgotten archives. Now, let us return to the skies and see how this machine changed the rules of warfare forever. Stay with us. Everything converged exactly at 300 yards, in a circle just 5 feet in diameter. Anything entering that zone faced a barrier of 100 armor-piercing and incendiary projectiles per second. The pilot of a captured twin-engine Messerschmitt 110 destroyer described the practical effect of this mathematics. The American fighters came from above. The plane ahead of us was not shot. It simply ceased to exist. The cockpit turned into metal confetti. In 2 seconds, a heavy bomber turned into nothing. This brings us to the most heated debate in the entire history of aviation, the rivalry between the P-51 Mustang and the P-47 Thunderbolt. The Mustang was the star of the show, sleek, agile, with a monumental range thanks to its drop tanks. The P-51 was the fighter that accumulated the highest number of pure aerial kills.
It stayed up high, hunting enemy fighters before they could get anywhere near the B-17 bombers. But the veterans of the era knew the underlying truth and used to repeat the saying, if you want to impress the girls in photos, fly a Mustang. But if you want to come back alive to hug your girl, fly a P-47. The Mustang's kill ratio looks superior on paper only because the P-47 was pulled from pure fighter sweeps and sent to do the most dangerous, dirty, and lethal job of the entire Second World War: ground attack. Where anti-aircraft defenses and heavy German flak shredded any lightweight aircraft, the Thunderbolt entered headfirst. Starting in 1944, the P-47 was transformed into the ultimate fighter bomber. Equipped with 1,000-pound bombs and 10 high-velocity aircraft rockets under the wings, each with the destructive power of a 105mm artillery piece, the Thunderbolt became an executioner in Europe. The German soldiers on the ground developed a deep psychological panic. They called them Jabos, the fighter bombers. The legendary German commander Hans von Luck recorded the overwhelming impact of these raids in his memoirs. They came in so low that we could see the expressions on the pilots' faces. The sound was deafening, the engines roaring, the rockets screaming. An entire column of 20 of our tanks and transport trucks simply ceased to exist in a single 2-second pass. The psychological impact on the men was devastating.
They were flying artillery with the accuracy of snipers.
The Wehrmacht doctors began diagnosing soldiers with Jabo fever, the panic of the Jabo. Soldiers hardened by the violence of the Eastern Front collapsed into nervous breakdowns and shook with fear just hearing the characteristic supersonic roar of the P-47's propeller blades approaching. The German hubris of 1943 had been completely wiped out. The most powerful army in Europe was forced into a historic humiliation. Due to the constant presence of the P-47, German divisions were banned from moving in broad daylight. The Thunderbolt locked Hitler's forces in the darkness of the night. The final card of the German Air Force was played on January 1st, 1945, in Operation Bodenplatte. In a desperate surprise attack, 900 German fighters struck Allied air bases.
They destroyed 22 P-47 fighters on the ground on one of the runways. A captured German pilot pointed at the burning wreckage and taunted the American commander. What do you think of that now? The American major, George Brooking, did not even blink. He pointed to the ground crews who were already clearing the runway and replied coldly, "By tomorrow morning, we will have 40 brand new planes parked right there. The real question is, how long will it take for you to replace your pilots?" The German's smile vanished. Within 48 hours, factory-fresh P-47 fighters filled the spots. Germany never recovered. The ultimate proof of the triumph of American design philosophy came years after the conflict ended. Lieutenant General Adolf Galland, the man who commanded the entire Luftwaffe fighter arm during the war, confessed their error after flying a captured P-47. "We made a terrible and unforgivable mistake in 1943. We saw this huge, heavy fighter, and we laughed with contempt. We said to each other that the Americans knew nothing about air combat, that they had built a bomber and called it a fighter. We were the fools. The Americans did not try to build a lightweight European fighter. They built an American machine, purely focused on the ability to take punishment, on devastating firepower, and on mass production. When I flew it after the war, I realized the power was formidable and the structure unshakable. When I understood that their industrial capacity could manufacture more than 15,000 of those complex machines while fighting a two-ocean war at the same time, I knew we never stood a chance."
Today, the rare surviving P-47 Thunderbolts rest in silence under the controlled light of military museums around the world. Their display plaques detail technical data, dimensions, and campaigns. But the true essence of that machine is written in the memories of the witnesses of history. The giant of Long Island entered the theater of war as an object of jokes and ridicule by its enemies, and left it as the ultimate instrument of annihilation. The United States did not defeat the German Air Force with acrobatic maneuvers. They simply took the determination of their youth, strapped it to the most powerful engine of its era, and buried the Third Reich under an unstoppable avalanche of American lead and steel. The Germans laughed at that flying milk bottle in April 1943. By May 1945, the silence in the skies of Europe proved that the thunder had spoken louder. Thank you so much for traveling back in time with us today. If this story moved you, please hit the like button, subscribe to our channel, and click the notification bell so you never miss our next historic journey. Before you go, leave your thoughts in the comments below. Your interaction keeps this history alive. Until next time, this is Dr. Vance, signing off.